The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? Remind us again, eternal God, that in you all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Allow that awareness to touch our very beings, that we would realize that all that is, and we ourselves, find its life and purpose in you. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through you and for you. And as we come to appreciate your majesty, may your authority penetrate our consciousness in such a way that we desire nothing more than to yield to your will in all that we do or decide. Grant that we would also find not just comfort in your omnipotence, but courage in your omnipresence, that as we venture into the day you have laid before us, we would find that in you all things are held together. Into your hands we commend our prayers as we pray them in your sovereign name. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from California, Mr. Craft.
Hand over your heart. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the House of Representatives met to certify President Trump's electoral victory. Over the past 4 years, President Biden's administration has imposed needless regulations on the American energy industry. It has spurred record-high inflation, and it has left our southern border wide open. The election results in November were a message from the American people that they want a new path forward, and that path begins today. It is now time to get to work to secure our border and to lower prices for the American people. Together with the House and with the Senate, I am confident that President Trump will be able to continue the progress that was made during his first administration to once again make America great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak out against the violence and persecution of Hindus and other religious minorities in Bangladesh. During Bangladesh's War of Independence in 1971, an estimated 300,000 to 3 million people were killed, mostly Hindus. Hindus in Bangladesh continue to be targeted today, with their homes and businesses being destroyed and their temples vandalized. Since the ousting of the former Prime Minister last August, these attacks have increased again, with over 2,000 incidents reported in August alone. I've engaged with the State Department and called for action in upcoming Senate confirmation hearings, but we must do more. I urge my colleagues to act now to protect Bangladesh's religious minorities. The world is watching, and we cannot let history repeat itself. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does a gentlewoman from Iowa seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to celebrate a true leader from my district, Mr. Derek Plame, Bettendorf's city administrator, who has recently been named the Quad Cities' most influential leader for 2024. Decker's leadership is defined by his dedication to his community and his remarkable ability to build relationships that foster growth, collaboration, and positive change. His work has helped transform Bettendorf into a thriving city with impressive developments like the I-74 bridge and the TBK Bank Sports Complex. His tireless efforts have been instrumental in securing funding and advancing projects that benefit the entire region. But Decker's impact extends beyond the city's infrastructure. He is a passionate mentor, a devoted volunteer, and a trusted resource for countless organizations. Whether he's emceeing a fundraiser, advising local leaders, or volunteering his time to nonprofits, Decker's consistently proves that his success and leadership is rooted in service to others. Decker's contributions have truly shaped our community, and I'm proud to represent him in Congress. Congratulations, Decker, on this well-deserved recognition. I'd also like to take a moment to wish my older sister, Mary Ann, a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Mary Ann. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. For what purposes does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
The body for 1 minute without objections.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and congratulate UCLA's next Chancellor, Dr. Julio Frank. Having served as president of the University of Miami and dean of Harvard School of Public Health, Dr. Frank is bringing decades of experience to UCLA. Dr. Frank was born in Mexico, where he discovered his passion for public health and service, and spent 6 years as Mexico's Secretary of Health. And I'm excited to see Dr. Frank bring his leadership experience as he serves the Bruin community and keeps UCLA as a top public university in the country. Doctor, we welcome you to the Bruin family, and I look forward to working with you on behalf of our constituents, our students, our educators. Look forward to continuing to do more good things. Thank you, Dr. Frank. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to recognize Penn State women's volleyball team's victory in the national championship. Penn State made history with its 3-1 win over Louisville in the NCAA Division I Women's Volleyball Championship in front of a record crowd of 21,860 fans. This was Nittany Lions' 8th national title in the program history. This victory didn't happen by chance. It's a result of relentless hard work, discipline, and teamwork. These women showed us what it means to commit fully every practice, every set, every match. They gave their all. This success is possible because of the incredible leadership of the coaching staff, whose mentorship has shaped this team not only into champions, but also into outstanding young leaders. Penn State coach Katie Schumacher-Cawley became the first woman coach to win an NCAA Division I volleyball title. The road to the championship wasn't easy for Coach Schumacher-Cawley. In October, she announced she was diagnosed with breast cancer. This championship win isn't just about a trophy. It's about a story of strength, resilience, and the values that define Penn State. These women make us all proud to wear blue and white. Congratulations, Penn State women's volleyball, on your national championship. We are. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute without objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to honor my friend and an honorable New Mexican, Carlsbad Mayor Dale Janway, who passed away December 30th, 2024. Mayor Janway served Carlsbad with integrity and distinction as mayor for 13 years. He was deeply involved in his community and made remarkable progress during his tenure. He worked with leaders of all political stripes to improve the city's infrastructure, including the Double Eagle Water Project, which we worked on together. Although we came from different parties, Mayor Janway was a good friend and was always willing to work together for the good of his community. He had a passion for educating youth so they would become thoughtful, engaged citizens. He helped create jobs, improved the lives of Carlsbad families, and protected critical industries. The mayor also proudly served his country in the Army National Guard. Mayor Janway exemplified leadership, leaving behind a legacy that reminds us all to serve with kindness and with purpose. Thank you for your service, Mayor. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute and ask for unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to honor our December Veteran of the Month, Major Jamie Melchert, who was born in Sedalia, Missouri. Major Melchert enlisted in the Army National Guard in 1998 and completed 2 combat tours, serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. He also completed additional overseas missions in Guatemala and Germany. Jamie says his most memorable service was in Afghanistan, where he led a group of 170 soldiers into a harsh combat zone for a year of duty, enduring frequent attacks during over-the-road convoys. He's most proud of bringing every soldier there home to his families. He received many honors for his service and retired in 2017. He now lives in Columbia, Missouri, with his beloved family, working full-time for the state of Missouri's Office of Administration, helping veterans find employment. Thank you, Major Melchert, for your dedication and your service. And thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A peacemaker, environmentalist, and humanitarian, President Jimmy Carter's work left an indelible mark on our country and the Western New York community. He was no stranger to my district, visiting for speeches at the University at Buffalo and Canisius University, campaign rallies in Cheektowaga and Tonawanda, and even making a stop at Niagara Falls State Park while celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary with his beloved wife, Rosalind. During his presidency, he established the Superfund program, supporting the cleanup of toxic sites across Western New York, including Love Canal. Following his term in office, he set the standard for the post-presidency and saved millions of lives by advancing global health, including through his efforts to end child malaria fatalities and destigmatize HIV. He was a man of faith who loved his family and loved our country. Let us mourn our nation's loss, celebrate a life well lived, and learn from his legacy of always putting country before self. May President Jimmy Carter rest in peace. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
You can ask consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, in another one of the 11th hour thumb the nose of the American people moves, the Biden administration has decided to transfer 11 Guantanamo detainees from the war on terror back to Oman, which is a reckless move that puts American lives at risk and is an insult, a slap in the face to those that have fought for freedom in that area and to try to stop the likes of Al-Qaeda. Our soldiers, our fighting people, everybody who's cared at all about that has to be taken as a slap in the face because justice never was done. These detainees, many of them have ties directly to terrorism, are being resettled without facing justice. This action weakens our national security and signals a dangerous leniency toward those who have plotted against our country. Despite the administration's claims, releasing these individuals only increases the likelihood they will return to their extremist roots and try to maybe pull off another 9/11, along with the cells that are already in this country. We've seen them already recycle through to some that have been released during the Obama era. This prioritizes political agendas, especially at the very end of this term, over the security of the American people and those that have fought so hard. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I want to thank the incredible families of Michigan's 12th Congressional District for sending me back to Congress. I am truly honored to be able to be your voice in the People's House. As one of the only members of the United States Congress that created neighborhood service centers, we've already returned over $6.2 million directly back into the pockets of many of my neighbors, invested $52 million in our communities, and assisted more than 10,000 of our families who needed help. As we begin the 119th Congress, I am determined more than ever to continue to fight for clean air, clean water, ending utility shutoffs, holding corporate polluters accountable, lowering the cost of living for working families, protecting Social Security and Medicare, and growing the Congressional Mamas Caucus, as well as, of course, ensuring quality, equality, and justice for all. To my residents, thank you. Thank you for believing in me. I will always have your back, and I will never sell out.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor and congratulate the Galveston Regional Chamber of Commerce on an incredible milestone, 180 years of outstanding service to our community. Since its founding in 1845, the Galveston Regional Chamber of Commerce has been an absolute cornerstone of economic development, business growth, education, and enhancing the quality of life in the Galveston area. The Chamber proudly represents over 750 members across diverse sectors, including small businesses, education, research, healthcare, government, nonprofit organizations, and religious groups, truly embodying the spirit of collaboration and progress. As the oldest Chamber of Commerce in Texas, we are blessed to have this remarkable institution in our community and in my district. It's under the outstanding leadership of Gina Spagnola, President Spagnola, and her exceptional team. The Chamber continues to make an enduring impact on Galveston and beyond with her leadership. Congratulations, President Gina Spagnola, Galveston Regional Chamber of Commerce, on 180 years of absolute excellence. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Yes, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to grieve the loss of Dr. Bob Nichols, who passed away on December the 20th. Dr. Nichols was a renowned professor at Young Harris College with an impressive 35-year teaching career at the school. He taught math and he coached tennis at the Westminster schools in Atlanta, Gainesville College, and Young Harris College. Dr. Nichols was an All-American tennis player during his time at Georgia Tech and earned a spot in the Georgia Tech Athletic Hall of Fame. He impacted thousands of students during his 42-year teacher career. In September of 2011, Young Harris College named their campus tennis complex in honor of Dr. Nichols. Additionally, Dr. Nichols designed a strong advising program and was the chair of the Mathematics and Science Division at Young Harris College. The college's Board of Trustees awarded him Professor Emeritus status in 2010 for his decades of dedicated service and received several other remarkable awards. Dr. Nichols will always be remembered as an outstanding coach, an outstanding mentor, and a friend to all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California, Mr. Clintock, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 5, I call up the bill H.R. 29 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 29, a bill to require the Secretary of Homeland Security to take into custody aliens who have been charged in the United States with theft and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the majority leader and the minority leader or their respective designatees. The gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, each will control for 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Clintock.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material on H.R. 29.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the brutal murder of Laken Riley was foreordained the day that Joe Biden took office and reversed the successful Trump policies that had finally secured our borders. Since that day, just 4 years ago, more than 7.8 million illegal aliens have been deliberately allowed into our country. The population the size of the state of Washington, our 13th largest state. Very little is done to vet these millions of illegal migrants. We don't know how many terrorists and violent criminals are among them, and worse, the Democrats don't seem to care. We know that the number of terrorists we are apprehending has skyrocketed, and that violent international crime cartels and violent foreign gangs are now operating freely in our communities, often protected from deportation and detention by the Democrats' sanctuary laws. One of these criminals has now been convicted of the brutal murder of Laken Riley. How many such monsters have the Democrats deliberately allowed into our country? We do not know. But we are slowly, painfully, and tragically finding out, victim by victim. In this case, the murderer was paroled into this country through a shocking abuse of this power by the Biden administration. He was repeatedly arrested for theft and other crimes in sanctuary jurisdictions, and each time released back onto our streets. Just months before Laken Riley's murder, this murderer was arrested for theft, but he was released, and ICE did not take him into custody because of a Biden administration policy that shields many criminal aliens from arrest and deportation. Sadly, this is exactly what those who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 voted for, because this is exactly what the Democrats promised to do. Fortunately, those who voted for Donald Trump in 2024 voted to stop this tragic travesty of our immigration laws, because that is what he has promised to do and will begin doing over the Democrats' objections beginning at noon on January 20th. During his first term, President Trump proved that the president, on his own authority, can secure our borders. President Biden proved that a president determined to undermine and make a mockery of our immigration laws can willfully open those borders to the most violent criminals and terrorists and gangs and cartels on this planet and use the Democrats' sanctuary laws to protect them. This national nightmare will end at noon on Inauguration Day. But what of future presidents? The Laken Riley Act would require ICE detention for illegal aliens who are charged with, arrested for, or convicted of any burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting offense. H.R. 29 further requires the Department of Homeland Security to issue a detainer for those illegal aliens and take custody of them effectively and expeditiously. It would also allow states to bring a civil action against derelict federal officials who refuse to enforce these laws. Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas, I'm looking at you. This bill passed the Republican House in March of last year, but Senate Democrats stopped it cold. I said at the time that today the name on the bill is Laken Riley. Tomorrow it will be another victim of these policies, another son or daughter of a loved one. It won't stop until this administration is stopped, and that can only be done by the American people. Well, thank God the American people have done exactly that. They have given this Congress and this president the tools and the mandate to secure our borders and remove every person who has broken into our country by violating our laws. But without this law, a future Democratic president could once again release dangerous illegal aliens back onto our streets to prey on our people and destroy innocent young lives like Laken Riley. This bill will stop them. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. The Biden administration brought us back from a devastating pandemic and the Trump economic crisis by investing in American workers, American manufacturing, and American infrastructure. Our policies for the working class majority, instead of the tiny, rapacious billionaire class, pulled our economy back from the brink. Today, our nation's economic strength is, quote, the envy of the world, as The Economist magazine put it, with an unemployment rate of 4.2%. wages rising across America, and the gross domestic product growing at a robust 3.1%. Moreover, the murder rate is way down in America. Unlawful immigration at the southern border is now below where it was when Donald Trump left office 4 years ago. And the roaring stock market, which is what Trump and his billionaire entourage care about, just completed its strongest 2 years in a quarter century. Now it's time to make sure all Americans enjoy the benefits of this astonishing economic growth. We should be coming together today to increase the minimum wage, to lift children out of poverty, and to strengthen unions, Social Security, Medicare, and the middle class. But Donald Trump is instead assembling a billionaire cabinet from the top 0.00003% of the wealthiest Americans, drawing the top tier of his new administration from poolside cocktail hour at Mar-a-Lago, and setting up the broligarchs and the plutocrats to plunder an even larger share of government contracts and public resources. Trump campaigned on the seductive promise of bringing down the high post-COVID-19 prices for rent, groceries, consumer goods, and health care. But now he's preparing to give power over the economy to his team of globe-trotting, dictator-dealing CEOs and billionaires, the very people responsible for exploiting the pandemic to increase prices in the first place. I doubt the billionaire oligarchs have any interest in bringing down the cost of living for the working middle class in America. But if they do, Democrats stand ready to work with them. After all, we're the ones who dramatically lowered prescription drug prices in Medicare, capping out-of-pocket monthly expenses at $35 a month. I had constituents who were paying $500 a month for insulin as diabetics before that, and it's capped now at $35 a month. And we capped annual total out-of-pocket expenditures for prescription drugs at $2,000 a year. It was the MAGA Republicans deep in the pocket of Big Pharma who categorically and vehemently opposed us every step of the way on lowering prescription drug prices in Medicare. But if our colleagues now have good policy proposals for continuing to lower prices, as we've done, which is what they campaigned on, by all means, bring the proposals forward. Let's see them. Democrats have repeatedly crossed the aisle to hammer out bipartisan compromise. Last year, President Biden and Senate Democrats worked with the ultra-conservative Republican Senator James Lankford to arrive at a tough bipartisan border security deal. But President Trump aggressively tanked the deal, openly expressing his preference for railing against a border crisis rather than actually developing a border solution. Now today the Republicans are on the floor, not with their long-awaited but entirely missing policy solutions to the problems of inflation or immigration. Instead, their bill today is an empty and opportunistic measure. It's not like the compromise they tanked in the last Congress, a bill for greater border security, or for better technology in the ports of entry, or for expanding legal pathways to immigration and citizenship for millions of people, or for addressing huge immigrant visa backlogs. No. This bill would upend 28 years of mandatory immigration detention policy by requiring that any undocumented immigrant arrested for theft, larceny, or shoplifting be detained even if they are never convicted or even charged with a crime. This is a radical departure from current law, which since 1996 has generally required mandatory detention only for persons who are criminally convicted or who admit to having committed certain serious crimes. That is, when criminal guilt is certain and established beyond a reasonable doubt. Under this bill, a person who's lived in the United States for decades, say for most of her life, paid taxes and bought a home, but who was mistakenly arrested for shoplifting, would not be freed to resume her life, but rather would be detained and deported even if the charges are dropped and even if the police admit that the arrest was mistaken. Consider a young dreamer or TPS recipient who's with a group of friends after school, and someone in the group shoplifts, stealing a candy bar. To scare the whole group straight, everyone's arrested, whether they were involved in the shoplifting or not. But nobody is charged, and the charges are dropped. For most of the kids, it's a humiliating afternoon and a valuable life lesson. But for one of them, a young person who's been in America lawfully for years with his or her family, the consequences would be devastating under this legislation. Mandatory detention and deportation from the country just for having been arrested, even if never charged. It seems to me passing strange, Mr. Speaker, that our friends are taking this position when they do not even believe that the criminal justice system can be trusted when a jury unanimously convicts someone who's had the best legal representation money can buy in the state of New York on 34 different felony criminal counts after an extended criminal trial with all due process protections, including cross-examination and the right to counsel being afforded. If the criminal justice process cannot be trusted to identify a truly guilty person, even when that person has been arrested, charged, indicted, prosecuted, represented at every stage, given an opportunity to cross-examine all witnesses and to testify personally, and then is unanimously convicted by a jury of his peers beyond a reasonable doubt, how can the criminal justice process be trusted to identify a truly guilty person just with an arrest and no indictment, no prosecution, no cross-examination, no neutral adjudication by an impartial judge, no fact-finding, and no criminal conviction by a 12-person jury beyond a reasonable doubt? Mandatory detention has always been reserved for people who are convicted of crimes and actually commit crimes. Expanding the detention requirement to include every person who's merely been accused of or arrested for, even if not charged for, shoplifting, for example, collapses the distinction between actual conviction on serious offenses versus simply being charged with or arrested for something very minor, even if the charges don't even lead anywhere. Congress has never even appropriated sufficient resources to detain all non-citizens who do fall under the currently serious mandatory detention categories. Even President Trump, during his first term, never tried to detain all migrants theoretically subject to mandatory detention. So this extremely elastic new provision adds nothing to the equation other than more empty rhetoric and greater bureaucratic bloat. The bill also seeks to give state governments authority and control over the federal immigration system by trespassing on the Article II executive power in a way that 8 out of 9 justices on the Supreme Court completely repudiated 2 years ago as a blatant violation of the separation of powers. The bill seeks to give state attorneys general precisely what the Supreme Court has denied: constitutional standing to sue the federal government in court for perceived violations of sections of the Immigration and Nationality Act, so states can block federal immigration policies, capsizing the Supremacy Clause and expanding judicial power to encroach upon executive discretion under Article II. In June of 2023, the Supreme Court in United States versus Texas emphatically rejected the alleged standing of states to sue the federal government to alter the government's immigration arrest policies. This bill attempts a legislative bypass of this constitutional decision in U.S. versus Texas, written by Justice Kavanaugh and joined by 8 of 9 justices on the court. In rejecting the state standing argument, the court observed, among other things, that lawsuits alleging insufficient arrests or prosecution run against the executive branch's exclusive Article II authority to enforce immigration law, which includes the discretion to determine enforcement priorities in the face of a chronic lack of resources and shifting public safety, public welfare, and foreign policy needs and priorities. If this bill were to become law, both provisions would have the perverse effect of undermining the federal government's efforts to prioritize the detention and the deportation of the truly most dangerous convicted felons. With the vastly expanded new statutory scope and new authority for states to get legal standing on steroids, the government can be sued by a state for not detaining everyone charged with or even arrested for the pettiest of crimes like shoplifting. This bill tries to give states standing to sue for harms as small as $100, dramatically shifting power from the executive branch to the courts and the federal government to the states, both in ways considered completely dubious by the Supreme Court. Like many of the immigration-related bills the GOP is now advancing, this one seems to follow a simple strategy. Pick a crime, paste into it a template immigration law covering convicted criminals, and then require detention or deportation of certain persons merely accused of committing the crime or arrested for committing the crime. No due process required at all. This allows us to get up and demonize immigrants without doing anything to fix the immigration system, and to act tough without actually making America safer or solving any of the problems within the immigration laws. We should be working together on comprehensive, meaningful reform. My colleague from California invites us to believe that the only crimes committed by undocumented aliens are those who entered during the Biden administration. Well, in fact, if you look at it, hundreds of thousands, 500,000, crossed the U.S.-Mexico border in the first Trump administration, and over 1.1 million people who crossed during the first 4 years of his administration were eventually released from custody. One of the people released from custody, an undocumented alien, is charged with murdering 19-year-old Adam Luker from Alabama. Why don't we have a bill named after Adam Luker? Is it because of the inconvenient fact that the undocumented alien who killed him came in under Donald Trump? I would hate to think so, but we can find lots of cases like that. That's not what we should be doing here in Congress. We should be seriously confronting the problems in a serious way together, rather than just trying to make partisan hay out of other people's tragedies in their lives. Mr. Speaker, this legislation does not move the ball forward on any of the problems facing America. And they are being moved under closed rules, without a hearing, without any legislative scrutiny. This means that no member, not only just Democrats, but Republicans too, no member can offer any amendments to repair the gaping flaws and gaps in these slapdash political bills. So I would urge our colleagues to take a much more serious approach here. The murder of Laken Riley was an unspeakable, an appalling crime, a heinous act. And no parent and no family should ever have to bear such a calamity. We must take clear steps to make sure that people who commit crimes like this are punished to the full extent of the law. And I trust that my friends agree that those who commit horrific violent crimes like these must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But this bill fails to take any meaningful action to improve our broken immigration system and to prevent crimes like this from occurring again, whether the undocumented aliens entered under a Democratic administration, as they have, or a Republican administration, as they have. We are asked to vote on a bill that fails to address any of the real issues at stake, and we are foreclosed from offering any amendments to improve this sloppy and political product. I urge all colleagues to oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President-elect. The gentleman from California is now recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want you to listen to what my friend just said, that we shouldn't be placing illegals in detention simply for being charged with a crime, and besides, shoplifting's no big deal anyway. Listen to what he's actually suggesting. Current law requires the detention of every illegal alien who crosses our border. Every one. The Democrats have studiously ignored this law, and now they're saying, ignore this law even if the illegal has now been charged with committing other crimes as well. Let them back onto the streets, as they did with Laken Riley's murderer. And if a few innocent teens happen to get raped and murdered along the way, well, too bad. The Democrats have told us for 4 years that their refusal to enforce our immigration laws is because they're prioritizing more dangerous offenders. That is precisely what this bill does. It prioritizes dangerous offenders, and yet the Democrats are still opposing it. I'm now pleased to yield 5 minutes to the author of this measure, Mr. Mike Collins of Georgia. Mr. Collins represents Laken Riley's hometown and her grieving family in this House.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I thank my colleague for yielding. You know, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to encourage my colleagues to support the Laken Riley Act. You know, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that we record into history exactly what happened to this young lady. Young lady didn't have a care in the world. She was just out for a jog, enjoying the day, when an illegal criminal took her life away. He didn't even have any remorse, never hesitated. This legislation could have prevented her death. Her murderer was in our country illegally, was a known criminal. He had abused a child in New York City, was flown to Athens, Georgia, a sanctuary city, and all of this on the taxpayer's dime, where he was once again cited for shoplifting. Every part of our system failed Laken that day. And there's nothing we can do to bring her back. But I tell you what, we make sure this never happens again. Because right now, ICE is unable to detain and deport these illegal criminals who commit these minor level crimes. But the Laken Riley Act will fix this and give ICE and our local law enforcement the tools to get these criminals out of our country and make our communities safer. We need to get these people off the street. These criminals are getting bolder and bolder while our communities become more and more unsafe. And it's because our lax policies, they gave her murderer the courage to kill Laken Riley. And we got to make sure that this doesn't ever happen again. Mr. Speaker, he bashed her head in with a rock. This is one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. People need to know what this animal did to her. But I'm going to tell you what, they also need to know how she fought back. Laken fought back with every ounce in her body. And when I spoke to the family about this bill last year, I told them I'd never let it go. I will fight with every ounce that I have to make sure that no family has to suffer the loss like they have to these illegal criminals. Mr. Speaker, it's a sad day in America. It's a sad day when we allow these thug criminals to invade our homes, our country, and impose their violence and their will on the American people. We got the opportunity today, y'all. We got the opportunity to fix this. And I encourage all my colleagues to join me in voting yes. I want to leave you with an excerpt from a statement from the Laken Riley family. The Laken Riley Act has our full support because it would help save innocent lives and prevent more families from going through the kind of heartbreak we've experienced. Laken would have been 23 on January the 10th. There is no greater gift that could be given to her or our country than to continue her legacy by saving lives through this bill. Every single member of Congress should be able to get behind this purely common sense bill that will make our country and communities safer. Mr. Speaker, God help us. God help us. I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Knapler.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 29. I want to start by expressing my deepest condolences to Laken Riley's family. Her death was a tragedy, and we all mourn her loss. May her memory be a blessing. I wish that we were considering legislation that was worthy of her name. Instead, the Republican majority is beginning this new Congress right where they left off in the last one, with legislation that targets and scapegoats immigrants but does nothing to address the real problems in our broken immigration system, all while ignoring basic due process and constitutional principles. Among other things, this legislation would subject to mandatory detention any undocumented immigrants who are merely charged with committing an act of theft or shoplifting, even if they are innocent. This means that someone who's merely accused of shoplifting, Someone who might be innocent, who might be the victim of mistaken identity, and who has not had the opportunity to clear his name, would be subject to mandatory detention. This bill is so broad that it would lead to the detention of people who have committed no crime and have no intention of harming anyone. That flies in the face of all notions of basic due process and reason. It's both pernicious and absurd. And where will the federal government get the resources to detain all these people? Congress has never appropriated, and no administration has ever requested sufficient resources to detain all non-citizens who fall under the mandatory detention categories. Even President Trump, during his first term, never tried to detain all migrants subject to mandatory detention. It was far too costly, even for him. And because this bill is so sweeping, even dreamers and people living here on temporary protected status, people who may have lived here in this country for decades and shortly after their birth, could be subject to the bill's harsh provisions. If that weren't bad enough, the bill also declares that states have standing to sue over certain immigration provisions so long as the state or its residents suffer even the most trivial financial harm. This appears to be a ham-handed attempt to circumvent recent Supreme Court rulings limiting states standing to sue the federal government over immigration enforcement matters. But merely declaring that the states have standing to sue does not make it so, and this provision is almost certainly unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the lack of attention that Republicans pay to such matters perfectly sums up their entire approach to immigration. Instead of working towards serious solutions to serious problems, they are content to simply play politics and consider it a job well done. I urge my colleagues to oppose this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
We reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to Mr. Andy Biggs of Arizona, who's done yeoman work on our subcommittee on this issue.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, and I thank our subcommittee chairman, Mr. McClintock, for yielding. Again, our hearts go out to the Laken Riley family. We think about them. This bill is named for Laken Riley, but it has an impact far greater. But once again, we must acknowledge that we can no longer take the feigned, empty words of sympathy from those across the aisle and the Biden-Harris administration because they refuse to do anything meaningful to stop the carnage or even slow down the border surge that's been going on. Illegal aliens who commit crimes must not be released into our communities. Our colleagues can't even use the term of art that's in the statute, illegal alien. They can't even use that. They conflate legal immigration with those who enter our country illegally. They call them undocumented immigrants. That's what they do. They don't ever stand up for the American people. And instead of taking the mandate of an overwhelming popular vote victory and an electoral college victory by this coming in President Donald Trump on the issue of border security, they let it go. They ignore it. In fact, places like San Diego, you know what San Diego just did? They declared themselves a super sanctuary city. Nobody is going to be held for ICE. So you get to explain to the victim of Nicholas Jose Francisco, a 25-year-old illegal alien from Guatemala, charged with molesting and raping a 5-year-old little girl. In New York City, there's more than 58,000 illegal aliens with a criminal record who have been charged with a crime on their streets. Or you get to explain and apologize to the victim of the 31-year-old illegal alien from Mexico who was recently arrested for breaking into a woman's home and raping her. This goes on and on because my colleagues don't want to hold these people in detention.
Yield an additional minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
You get to explain to the victim of the 28-year-old illegal alien who tortured and burglarized a Dallas woman just a month or two ago. Yeah, so you can stand up and say, we're not bringing meaningful legislation. You can stand up and say that you feel real bad for Laken Riley and her family. And how about all the other victims of illegal aliens who have committed crimes? But you know the first thing they did that was illegal? They entered our country. You want to protect them. We want the law enforced. I yield back.
Gentleman yields.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the Democrats got behind a bipartisan border security bill which beefed up law enforcement at the border, which beefed up judges at the border, and that was tanked by Donald Trump and by the Republicans in the House. They are the ones, Mr. Speaker, who refuse to engage in meaningful legislative work to get the job done here. We won't be lectured by our colleague that we don't stand up for the American people. The author of this legislation actually yesterday sent out a tweet, social media statement characterizing the January 6th violent assault on this chamber, where 140 officers were wounded, injured, and hospitalized by a rampaging mob this way. On this day in history, 2021, said the gentleman, thousands of peaceful grandmothers gathered in Washington, D.C. to take a self-guided, albeit unauthorized tour of the U.S. Capitol building. I like that touch, albeit unauthorized. Earlier that day, President Trump held a rally where supporters walked to the Capitol to peacefully protest the certification of the 2020 election. During this time, some individuals entered the Capitol, took photos, and explored the building before leaving. Well, isn't that sweet? We see exactly how much faith and confidence they really have in the American criminal justice system and how much they really stand on the side of law enforcement. Yeah, it was just a leisurely stroll by a bunch of peaceful grandmothers on January 6th. And these are the people that now are inviting us to dramatically change the immigration laws without even a hearing as to what it's going to mean in any particular case. I yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Laken Riley was, by all accounts, a remarkable young woman whose life was tragically cut short by a horrific act that should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. My heart goes out to her family and loved ones who grieve her death. And I understand, as a mother myself, fully why, in the face of such senseless violence, especially against someone so young, there is an urge to do something, anything, to feel like you are actually helping to fix the problem. Unfortunately, this bill does nothing to fix the immigration system or to prevent future tragedies like this. It is simply an attempt to score cheap political points off of a tragic death. And in the process, it unfairly sweeps up many more innocent lives with no due process. So let us be clear. This is the Republican playbook over and over again. Scare people about immigrants. Never propose anything that actually solves an outdated and arcane immigration system that desperately needs Congress to allocate resources and update legal pathways to make the immigration system work for everyone. My Republican colleagues simply want to preserve a broken immigration system as a campaign issue so that they can scapegoat and demonize immigrants, all to distract the American people from their real goals of making working people pay for another Republican tax scam that benefits billionaires and the wealthiest. Just look at the rules package that they just passed. Out of the 12 bills included in that, not a single one does anything to secure the border, to fix the broken immigration system, to lower costs for working people, to address the housing crisis, tackle the extraordinary levels of income inequality in this country, or tamp down on inflation. Those were the promises of the Trump campaign, but not a single one of those things is actually included in the first bills that they are bringing to the floor without hearings. So let's talk about what this bill actually does. This bill goes far beyond subjecting those who are convicted to or admit to committing a theft offense to mandatory detention. What this bill actually does is subject any undocumented immigrant to mandatory detention for merely being arrested or charged with committing an act of theft, larceny, or shoplifting, along with those who are convicted or who admit to committing such acts. So under this bill, a DACA or a TPS recipient could be subjected to mandatory detention for crimes that are extremely low level or for something that's not even a crime, without even having had a fair day in court, without a conviction. So let's be clear, we are talking about people who have been in this country for decades. Many of us in Congress are parents. Imagine your child is with a group of kids grabbing an after-school snack at a 7-Eleven, and one of them chooses to just snitch a little candy bar off the shelf. The shop owner calls the police, and all the kids are arrested for shoplifting. If your child is a DACA recipient, someone who has lived here nearly their entire life, they are now subject to mandatory detention under this bill. Unfortunately, there are countless real-life examples of people getting wrongfully arrested for crimes that they didn't commit. In 2019, a man in New Jersey was arrested for shoplifting and trying to hit a police officer with a car because facial recognition software falsely identified him as the perpetrator. He spent 10 days in jail, even though he was actually 30 miles away from where the crime was committed. If he had been a DACA or a TPS recipient and this bill had been enacted, he would be subject to mandatory immigration detention, even though he was innocent of the crime of which he was accused. People deserve to have their day in court and are innocent until proven guilty. That seems to be something that the majority has forgotten or doesn't seem to care about unless the alleged criminal is the president-elect. The upcoming administration is poised to bring back their no priority immigration enforcement priority guidelines, in which a convicted murderer would be the same priority for deportation as an undocumented mom who has been living in this country for 20 years. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, how much money a sweeping mandatory detention proposal like this will cost the federal government at a time.
His time has expired.
I yield the gentlelady 30 seconds additional.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, I yield her 1 minute.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Imagine how much money a sweeping mandatory detention proposal like this will cost the federal government at a time when Republicans are talking a big game about cutting budgets, but not this one. Why? Because this is a great boon to those for-profit detention companies who make enormous profits from mandatory detention when there are far more effective and cheaper ways to address the issue. And who pays for all of this? The taxpayers. Even in a Republican trifecta, ICE has limited resources to detain and remove folks. But in this bill, like President Trump's enforcement priorities, we seek to use those resources on people who committed low-level crimes or even no crime at all. That makes no one safer and costs a lot of money. Finally, this bill also bizarrely attempts to give state attorneys generals the authority to try and stop administrations from carrying out important policy priorities by giving them standing to sue in federal court under various sections of the Immigration and Nationality Act. That entire section of the bill, likely unconstitutional. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this overly broad, deeply flawed legislation, and I yield back.
We reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Again, members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president-elect. The gentleman from California is now recognized.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is going to go a long way to reverse the lawlessness of the Biden administration. I'd like to tell you a story for a moment. A criminal illegal alien entered the country with known gang tattoos and was allowed through Biden's porous border. He made his way to the state of Wisconsin, where he had warrants issued in Dane County for strangulation, suffocation, false imprisonment, battery, and disorderly conduct. He was not detained and deported as he should have been because Dane County is a sanctuary county. He then made his way to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he was arrested for simple property crimes. He was not detained and deported as he should have been as a criminal illegal alien because Minneapolis is a sanctuary city. Then he made his way to a small town of 5,600 people, Prairie du Chien, my hometown, where he brutally raped a mother and savagely beat her daughter over a period of days and was finally arrested for domestic battery, strangulation, suffocation, physical abuse to a child, disorderly conduct, and 2 counts of second-degree sexual assault. None of this needed to happen if the law was adhered to. None of this would have taken place if this person was detained and deported for a simple property crime. Enough! It is the federal government's primary responsibility to protect its citizens. And you, sir, and my Democrat colleagues are refusing to do this, and it is shameful. It is time to protect our American citizens against criminal, illegal aliens, and I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to strongly support this bill. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman. Maryland reserves. So the gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Harris.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in strong support of H.R. 29, the Laken-Riley Act. For the past 4 years, the American people have suffered under the Biden administration's disastrous open border policies that have allowed millions of illegal aliens to flood our communities. One of those illegal aliens was Jose Ibarra. In 2023, he was caught shoplifting. And despite multiple arrests on his record, in addition to his illegal status, he was released under the Biden administration. Months later, as we all know, he murdered 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley. There's just no other way to put it. Her death is a direct result of President Biden's deliberate refusal to enforce our laws. It is the federal government's job to defend our borders and protect our citizens, and our government has failed us. Fortunately, a new leader is taking office soon. This past November, Americans demonstrated that they are fed up with the left's refusal to secure our border. I'm proud to be a part of a Republican majority that will work with the new administration to strengthen our laws to ensure the safety of every American. While I'm confident that the Trump administration will secure our border and, yes, empower ICE to do its job, we must not allow our security to depend on whether or not a Republican occupies the White House. We in this Congress must ensure there are no future Laken Rileys. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this legislation, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California reserves.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
We reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 29, the Laken-Riley Act. This bill is in remembrance of Laken Riley, the 22-year-old nursing student who was tragically murdered last year in my home community of Athens, Georgia, by an illegal alien from Venezuela who should have never even been in our country. After illegally crossing the southern border in 2022, Laken's murderer was released through the Biden administration's weaponization of the parole program. The following year, he was arrested by the NYPD for acting in a manner to injure a minor and for committing a motor vehicle license violation. According to an Athens Clark County police report, this illegal alien went on to shoplift in Georgia just weeks after his encounter with law enforcement in New York. Clearly, this illegal alien had a pattern of criminal history, one that started when he accepted Joe Biden's invitation to illegally enter our country. He should have never been allowed to reside in the United States illegally, and ICE should have immediately issued a detainer after he committed these crimes. Because ultimately, if ICE had been aware and then issued a detainer, this criminal illegal alien would not have even been in the United States to commit the horrific murder of Laken Riley. We must enact changes now to protect our communities across the country from facing additional avoidable tragedies. Thankfully, H.R. 29 provides a common-sense solution to do just that. This legislation requires ICE to issue detainers and take custody of illegal aliens who commit crimes like theft, burglary, and larceny. But the local jurisdiction, the Athens-Clarke County Unified Government, was a sanctuary city. And that's another problem. That's a big problem. The sanctuary policy hampers the Athens-Clarke County Police Department and the Clarke County Sheriff's Office from recognizing and acting upon an ICE detainer, which could have prevented Laken's murder. Time and time again, communities and families throughout our nation have been devastated by heinous crimes committed by illegal aliens. In fact, this past October, the Peach State faced another unspeakable tragedy. In Habersham County, in my home district, Miss Mimi Rodriguez Ramirez was brutally murdered by an illegal alien from Mexico. She was just 25 years old and left behind a young daughter and a loving family. The citizens of Clarke County and Habersham County are hundreds of miles from any border, but are still being brutally victimized by illegal aliens. Enough is enough. These preventable tragedies must come to an end. As a co-sponsor of this critical legislation, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support the Laken Riley Act. After all, one of the most formidable ways that Congress can deliver justice for Laken Riley, for Mimi Rodriguez Ramirez, and for their families is by passing this legislation to prevent additional avoidable tragedies from victimizing the law-abiding citizens of our nation. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
You know, I wanted to address one thing before we start. It was mentioned again about the bipartisan bill. The bipartisan bill was a bad bill. It didn't stop catch and release. It didn't expedite immediately to the country of origin. It didn't rebuild the wall. It didn't have a stay in Mexico policy. It was words, it wasn't actions, it wasn't good. That's why people didn't vote for it. That's why it wasn't successful. Speaking about words, though, when I came here today, I thought about a lot of words. You know, I hear a lot of words, a lot of debate, a lot of discussion. But I got to tell you, to the family of Laken Riley and to so many others across the United States of America, words don't matter. Condolences don't count. Speeches don't do it. Words will never replace her life. You know, in life sometimes we've all gone through tragedies, and so often we say, my God, why did this happen? Why did this car accident happen? Why did this person get cancer? Whatever it is. This is different. We know why it happened. It happened because of the administration allowing illegals, some of whom, not all of whom, but some of whom were criminals, into our country, feeding them, clothing them, transporting them, housing them, paying for it. Men and women breaking their back in this country to make a living, but we're paying for it. We know how it happened. We know how it happened to the New York City woman who was put on fire. We know how it happened to State Trooper Christopher Gadd in Washington State when he died because of illegal alien. We know how it happened to Elizabeth Medina from the great state of Texas, 16 years old, and her life was snuffed out. That's never okay. And Laken Riley, fighting for her life. You hear about her last 20 minutes on this earth. She fought, and she fought with everything she had. She didn't want to be raped. She didn't want to be brutalized. So this, I don't want to curse here. This individual may.
Another minute to the gentleman.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
This individual then took a rock and bashed her head in until it's unrecognizable. You know what? Condolences aren't going to do it. I say it to my friend on the other side of the aisle, the ranking member. Feeling bad, feeling sorry is not going to do it. It doesn't make the difference. All of us here, most of us have been mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, daughters, or sons. You can't imagine how her family feels. People say, I know how you feel. No, I don't know. I don't know. You don't know. But there is something we could do. All this bill is detain people who've done something wrong, who've broken the law already, and they have the potential to do even worse. All of these cases that I mentioned and many more would not have occurred if we had this law in place. Don't give the condolences. Vote for the bill. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm moved by the words of the gentleman from New Jersey who said, "Don't give us words. Words don't matter. Speeches don't cut it. Speeches don't do it." And it sounds like an absolute echo of what you hear from our colleagues whenever there's an explosion of gun violence in any of our communities. And we hear thoughts and prayers, lots of words, but no action. So the fact that there is sympathy or condolences, I agree with the gentleman, that's not enough. We need real public policy changes that will be effective and that will be constitutional. And that's what the discussion is about today. Will these policy changes in fact be effective? Will they be constitutional or not? But I agree that we should move from the situation of identifying and empathizing with people who've suffered terrible family tragedies and private tragedies to effective public policy. That's our job as legislators. I will reserve.
From California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, perhaps we should take all of the criminals off the streets, starting with those who shouldn't have been in our country in the first place, which is what this bill does. I'm now pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support this important legislation which would take concrete policy steps toward addressing the problem created by this administration of open borders. And we listened to the gentlelady from Washington on the other side talk about the cost of implementing the legislation. Well, that requires a certain amount of hubris to claim, to be worried about the cost of implementing a piece of legislation when the costs of the open borders that have been created by this administration and embraced by the other side are clearly evident. I've been to the border. We've seen the impact that open borders have had on the educational systems, the transportation systems, the housing systems, the agriculture systems. All across this country, our nation is a nation of border communities now because we are all being impacted by these open borders. Back in 2022, Laken Riley's horrific murder shocked the nation. But also shocking was the fact that her murder was preventable. It was preventable by enforcing the laws of this country. After his arrest for crossing the border illegally in 2022, he was paroled into the United States. Months before murdering Laken Riley, he was arrested for theft, but local authorities in Georgia released him, and ICE didn't lodge a detainer for the alien. Unfortunately, these two actions directly contributed to the murder of Laken Riley. This legislation that bears her name would require ICE to arrest illegal aliens who commit theft offenses, and importantly mandates that these aliens are detained until they're removed from the country. And it further requires that the Department of Homeland Security issues a detainer for these illegal aliens and take custody of them effectively and expeditiously. While we anxiously await President Trump's inauguration and know that his administration will follow and enforce immigration law and take steps to advance the enforcement of our borders, the Laken Riley Act ensures that all administrations are held accountable, including the previous one, and that our immigration laws are followed. I support this important legislation. Thank the gentleman for his leadership on the bill and yield back the balance of my time now.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, Mr. Pfluger of Texas.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support and full support of H.R. 29, the Laken Riley Act. It's long overdue that we actually take law and order seriously, that we enforce the laws that are on the books. Laken Riley is not an isolated incident, unfortunately. Jocelyn Nungaray from Texas, Mother Rachel Marin, and many others. These were innocent women who were horrifically killed by illegal aliens, and their families are going to be mourning their loss of life for the rest of their lives. Violent criminals like the ones who committed this heinous act and others continue to pour over our border daily, which is why we desperately need to pass this act today. And this legislation will protect American communities by requiring Immigration and Customs Enforcement to issue detainers, mandatory detention for those who are here illegally who also commit theft. It's pretty simple. There should be nothing controversial about this. In fact, I'm interested to see when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who vote against this go back to their districts, Madam Speaker. They go back to their districts and they tell them, I don't stand for law and order because I don't want illegal aliens who are here committing theft or rape or murder or any other offense to be detained. How can you go back to a district and say that? In Texas, by the way, good news with the Laken Riley Act, that you now have standing to sue the federal government when they don't do this, when they don't enforce the laws on the book. You have standing to sue the federal government for failing to uphold the laws that are on our books. My heart goes out to Laken Riley's family. My heart goes out to other people who have had to watch as this administration has stood by and done nothing to protect our country, our communities, and the sanctity of the safety that we as Americans should always have. Let's go home and let's be proud in a bipartisan way that we're willing to uphold the law. And I stand in full support of the Laken Riley Act. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just in answer to the distinguished gentleman, he stated precisely what the law is now. He said, how can we go back to our districts and not defend the immediate deporting of people who have committed theft? That's what the law is. They want to change the law to go from someone who's actually committed theft or been convicted of theft to people who've been charged with it, even if the charges have been dropped, or arrested for it, even if charges were never brought in the first place. So I think that the misstatement of the meaning of this legislation speaks very deeply to what an opportunistic exercise this really is. What the gentleman was asking for is the law today. We reserve.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Well, I would remind my friend that the law also requires every illegal alien to be detained until their case is adjudicated. This bill simply, which is what the Democrats have ignored these last 4 years, this bill simply says if on top of that an illegal is charged with a crime, they need to be detained and taken off the streets. The murderer of Laken Riley was charged but not convicted. Had he been treated as the detainer law requires, he would have been deported and Laken Riley would be alive today. I am prepared to close when the gentleman is ready.
We have no further speakers, and we're prepared to close too.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
How much time do I have, Madam Speaker?
Gentleman has 3¼ minutes remaining.
Thank you kindly. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the distinguished gentleman from California for this debate. I must say that the legislation before us and the approach that it embodies reflect a profound disrespect for our criminal justice system and for our constitutional values. To begin with, they want to change the mandatory detention provisions, which we've had since 1996 on a bipartisan basis for the last 28 years. We have operated on the basis of criminal conviction, which is obviously congruent with the constitutional demands and values that we have in our country. And now, without having a legislative hearing, they want to radically revise the statutes to say that it's sufficient for somebody to have been charged with or arrested for an offense like shoplifting or theft, even if the charges are dropped and even if charges are never brought after an arrest is made. And so it seems to me that they are backtracking from a purported fidelity to our constitutional values. Similarly, they want to essentially overthrow Justice Kavanaugh's 8-1 decision in United States versus Texas from just a couple of years ago, where the court determined that states do not have standing just to go to court to say that they don't like the way that a particular administration is allocating its resources and implementing a public policy. Now, if they want to argue that there's a law that's unconstitutional, they can argue that, but they can't go to court and simply say that the executive branch is implementing the law in a way that a particular state doesn't like. And yet they want to occasion that massive shift of power, as Justice Kavanaugh characterized it, so that the states would essentially be able to control federal immigration policy. I'm still reeling from reading the gentleman from the author of this legislation's statements yesterday, which I think also speak to a fundamental disrespect for the rule of law. As he says, since January 6th, hundreds of peaceful protesters have been hunted down, arrested, held in solitary confinement, and treated unjustly. Countless hours and taxpayer dollars have been spent pursuing innocent grandmothers and raiding President Trump's home, while terrorists and millions of illegal immigrants continue to cross our nation's borders. That's the fundamentally demagogic and lawless approach to this whole debate that they've taken. Our body was invaded by a mob of insurrectionists who injured 140 officers, wounding them, hospitalizing them, and they cannot even acknowledge that as a fact, but instead change the subject to millions of people crossing the border illegally, which over the decades has undoubtedly happened under both Democrats and Republicans. That's what we should be working on today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I agree with my colleague that the riot at the Capitol 4 years ago was an abomination, and I've said so repeatedly whenever the subject arises. There is no excuse for it. I would also remind him what Justice Kavanaugh said in United States versus Texas. That's where the Supreme Court ruled the states currently don't have standing to sue to enforce these laws. What he actually said was, the ruling was that it would require a change in law, quote, elevating de facto injuries to the status of legally cognizable injuries redressable by a federal court. That's what Justice Kavanaugh said we needed to do. That is exactly what this bill does, by the book, and yet the Democrats still oppose it. To my Democratic colleagues, I ask you, how many more laws with names attached to them do we need to pass before you take this crisis seriously? How many American citizens must die at the hands of illegal aliens before we all agree that these tragedies are all preventable? Must the name of my child or your child be the one attached to an HR number before the Democrats can vote yes on these common sense bills? How much more blood must be shed before we can all join in calling for an absolute end to the Democrats' reckless open borders and sanctuary cities policies that have threatened our safety, devastated our families, and are in the process of destroying our country? The American people have now spoken clearly on this issue. Enough is enough. I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
To require the Secretary of Homeland Security to take into custody aliens who have been charged in the United States with theft and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed.
I'd like to
for what purposes, the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
I'd like to ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays have been requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the Chair. Thank you.
Mr. James.
I remember him because his chief used to be Education's general counsel.
Really?
Yeah. So she came up to me after the orientation.
That's why. Senator, he's the attorney general from Missouri at the same time.
The House will be in order. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the passage of H.R. 29, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 29, a bill to require the Secretary of Homeland Security to take into custody aliens who have been charged in the United States with theft and for other purposes.
Question is on passage of the bill. Members record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 264 and the nays are 159. The bill is passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Purpose does the gentlewoman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 9:30 a.m. on Thursday, January 9th, 2025.
Without objection. So, for what purpose does the gentlelady from Oklahoma seek recognition?
I move the House do adjourn.
Question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. on Thursday, January 9th, 2025.